Let's talk about Blue and Gold Hypertime in my DC cinematic universe. This movie starts off and we are finally properly introduced to Ted Kord, the genius CEO of Kord Industries. We'd start off with just a quick montage of post the Beetle escaping and bonding to Jaime, this guy spending years developing technology based on the Scarab's technology so that he could eventually become a superhero of his own, the Blue Beetle. And we actually tune in with him on the day he is putting the finishing touches on his super suit, and he suits up for the very first time. But then, boom! There is a big flash of golden light, and standing behind him is a strange man dressed in blue and gold. He apologizes to Ted for the quick extraction, but explains that the time stream is in danger, and he needs his best buddy. He grabs him, and they vanish. But while they're going through the time stream, and this guy starts running through all of his memories of trying to see, which era Ted he grabbed, because being a time traveler, their friendship isn't exactly linear. And he quickly realizes he went too far. This is the first time Ted has ever met him, and he is excited. And he looks at Ted and he says, "This may sound hard to believe, but my name is Booster Gold. I'm a time traveler from the future, and I am your best friend." And then boom, they pop out of the time stream at Ted's 5th birthday party. As Ted is kind of grappling with the reality that he is time traveling right now, he then comes to grips with the fact that he is actively witnessing his 5th birthday party happening, but then stuff that didn't happen on his birthday starts to happen. A nearby, bank robbery goes wrong. A wheel pops. The car careens into his birthday party, almost killing 5-year-old him. Luckily, 5-year-old him and Ted's mom are saved by Booster Gold. And then Ted's mom flirts with Booster Gold a little bit. And then Booster says, "Job done," and they hop back into the time stream with this guy just reeling. This time, they come out of the time stream on the day that Ted found the Scarab for the very first time. But once again, things go weird, and the Scarab manages to escape from Ted's force field bubble and bind to the younger Ted, taking over his mind. These two have to leap in and stop the Scarab-possessed past Ted, which they do. He has future technology. He rips that shit off of Ted. This guy fixes old Ted's force field. They leave it with him, and they hop back in the time stream after Skeets, who is there, his little helper robot, says that he's detected another anomaly. And they vanish once again. This time, the duo pop out in some weird post-apocalyptic future, and they see a past version of Booster and a future version of Ted fighting against an army of anthropomorphic tiger people. Booster comments, "Oh man, this was a good one." And then we watch as more weird stuff happens, and the past Ted trips and almost falls into a pit of spikes. Luckily, current our Ted saves him from that. Booster and Ted then work with past Booster, future Ted to stop the tiger people, and then they are leaving once again. He's pretty giddy now because he did just have a whole bunch of fun fighting anthropomorphic tiger people, and he's kind of coming to really enjoy time travel. And he's seeing glimpses of their future friendship through the lens of future him, and he's like, okay, I think I'm gonna have a pretty fucking dope life. But then as they're about to leave, a mysterious man wearing green and red appears off in the distance, spots Booster, and yells at him, "Dad, you have to stop this!" Booster panics, grabs Ted, and they vanish into the time stream once again. As they're traveling through the time stream, Ted asks, "Hey, who was that guy?" And Booster says, "Don't worry about it. It's just typical time travel nonsense. You'll find out all about it later." And then Skeets detects another anomaly, and the two pop out in the future. 1,000 years in the future. And this guy looks up and sees this giant glowing sign that says, "Come see the wedding of the century. Gold Star and Blue Beetle." And it's him next to the most beautiful woman he's ever seen in his entire life. And unfortunately, Skeets confirms that the anomaly, the source of the anomaly here, is coming from inside the chapel. So these two have to come in, where Ted runs face first into Gold Star, his future bride. She sees him in this suit, and she looks at him confused, and she's like, something old, something blue. But then she focuses on his face and she goes, oh, something young, something blue. And she angrily yells out, Michael! And then we see a younger Booster run in. He sees the different Ted. He looks at his sister, Gold Star, and he says, okay, this was not me, I swear. And then a giant explosion happens, and current Booster comes into the room and goes, yeah, sorry, Shell, this one's on me. And in his arms are the future about to be married Ted Kord. Michelle runs to her husband and then slaps both versions of her brothers, saying like, I don't know what you're doing, but really, time travel shenanigans on my wedding day? And young Booster is trying to be like, yo, this is not my fault. And Michelle is just like, yeah, but it will be. And then she looks at this Booster and he goes, hey, I'm just doing my job. Hypertime does not save itself. So then Wedding Day Booster and Wedding Day Ted and Gold Star all suit up in their own super suits, and then a superhero from the future known as Supernova, who's kind of a Superman pastiche a little bit, but also the dad of Gold Star and Booster Gold, shows up. He spots the two versions of his son and goes, damn it, Michael, what now? And then, coming out of the rubble, is the director. Booster Gold's self-proclaimed arch nemesis. And Booster's like, are you kidding? This guy? Oh my god, he's a pushover. And we see that Booster's reaction to that is shared by literally the entire wedding party and future Ted. So only this guy's out of the loop. The family leap into action to fight against the director and his men, and while this is happening, Ted and Gold Star get to meet for the first time, and while they're fighting, they're sort of talking, and she realizes, oh my god, this is how he met her for the first time, and she is so excited because he never told her how he met her. And now she realizes he met her at their wedding, and she's just giddy. And while this is happening, future Ted pops in making a joke about like, hey, they're trying to steal my wife, handsome, and they laugh, and Gold Star flies off, and then Ted and future Ted get to talk. And as they're talking, future Ted puts his hand on past Ted's shoulders and he tells him like, hey man, everything's gonna be okay. And past Ted's like, yeah, I get it. And he says, no, everything is going to be okay. But while this is happening, past Ted sees Gold Star walking up behind this guy, but she just flew off that way. And when he looks, he can see Gold Star flying there. And so when he looks back, we see Gold Star shapeshift into the Chiller, one of director's shapeshifting goons. And he tries to stab future Ted in the back, but past Ted stops him. He saves future him's life. And they defeat the director and the rest of his men really easily. The wedding is getting cleaned up. But then suddenly, that same blonde dude from before in the green and red shows up yelling at Booster, Dad, you have to stop this! And the entire Gold family turns around and they go, Rip? And then just completely panicking again, Booster grabs Ted and they fucking vanish into the time stream. However, instead of this time Skeets bringing them to another anomaly, they pop out pretty instantly somewhere close by. And Booster says, we're gonna have a little while. Skeets, run another anomaly report. I need to think. They have teleported this time into a future museum, surrounded by stuff that has not yet happened, at least to Ted. And Ted has to stop Booster and ask him, what the fuck is happening right now? Booster invites Ted to come sit down, and Booster begins to cry. Ted, seeing this, is like really off-put because this guy's been sort of like up full energy this whole time, and now he's just sitting there crying. And Ted puts his hand on his shoulder and he's like, what's going on, bud? And Booster reveals he's been a member of the Hypertime Masters for technically centuries. And he has spent the last 100 years of Hypertime trying to solve the case that he is currently on. And that's why he needs Ted's help, because Ted always knew what to do. And as Ted is reaching to him to say his name, he's cut off by another voice loudly saying it. We hear another angry, Michael! And Ted follows the source of the voice, looking over a balcony and seeing down on the ground, Supernova, approaching another Booster, but a much younger Booster, a Booster who appears to be maybe mid-20s. And this guy just lays into him. Ted looks back at Booster, and current Booster says, that guy, Rip, he's looking for us in moments from your time stream. So I took us to a moment from mine. One that's gonna take him a while to think to look at. And we see that this younger Booster that Supernova is admonishing is a janitor in the future Hall of Justice. And he's there yelling at his son, calling him a failure. They come from a long line of successful superheroes, and his sister, Gold Star, is being inducted as a prime member of the Legion of Superheroes, as one of the youngest members ever to be on the council. But Michael is wasting his life cleaning up after legends he knows he could never be. Supernova ends his yelling at his son with, he isn't good enough to be in the Legion, let alone ever good enough to earn a spot in this museum. And Supernova flies off, leaving a crying Michael. And Michael looks around at all of the super paraphernalia around him and says, not good enough to be in the museum, huh? And he starts stealing bits, hodgepodging his first Booster Gold suit. And he ends it by smashing some glass and stealing Ted Kord's time watch. He slaps it on his wrist and says, "Fuck you, Dad." And he disappears into the past. Now, seeing this, Ted is a little put off by the fact that Booster started his career as a criminal, but Booster points out, yes, his superhero career may have started with a criminal act, but he has become a savior of Hypertime, a hero to literally trillions. And he knows that this memory, this time, is one that they're going to have a little while to wait for. He then remembers, hey, he packed one of his mom's sandwiches for lunch on this day of work, and he's never gone back to get it. So he just leaves to go get that sandwich. While Booster is off getting his lunch, Ted decides to look around the future museum and sees installments from things that happen in his soon-to-be future. The Anti-Crisis, the Failsafe incident, and Kingdom Come. But as he's going, he's stopped, a hand going on his shoulder and turning around, and he is staring face to face with Rip Hunter. Rip tries to talk to him, saying, "Uncle Ted," but then sees that Ted has no idea who he is, and he sighs and goes, "Oh God, he's really gone off the deep end here." Ted asks Rip what is going on, and Rip explains he's Booster's son from the even further future. It's time travel stuff. He works with his dad in the Hypertime Masters, and he needs to take Ted home. But when he tries, Booster comes back and sees this. Booster leaps at Rip, calling Rip a liar, telling Ted not to believe him, and that this is probably just the Chiller, that shapeshifter from last time, still following them and trying to mess with them or something. Don't listen to him. Ignore everything he says. And Rip yells at his dad, saying, "Dad, if you don't stop this, the boss will." And Booster says, "I'd like to see him try." And he grabs Ted, and once again, they activate the time travel device, and they are gone. But as it's being activated, Rip messes with it, and Booster knows what Rip is doing. And suddenly, Ted and Booster come out in a high-tech facility, and looking out the window, they see that time is frozen, and Booster begins to have a panic attack. Booster desperately begs Ted, theoretically, how could you change a fixed moment in time? Something that keeps happening no matter how many times it is stopped. It travels through time, insisting that it has to happen. And Ted knows what's going on. The timeline isn't melting. The timeline isn't in danger. His timeline is in danger. He thinks harder on it, and he realizes what's the one thing every single one of these moments from his past, present, future have in common. He dies in them. Booster didn't accidentally run into Ted before they'd ever met. He purposefully did. Because Booster was hoping that the spectacle of time travel would distract young Ted enough to not think about this. And he turns to Booster and says, "I die." And Booster begins to cry, just nodding. Ted looks up and sees that Booster is standing in front of a door, very guarding of it. And Ted points to it and says, "In there?" And Booster breaks down, saying, "I just kept trying to stop it. I went back. I gave you better armor. We sent an android in your place. Every single time I changed what happens in there, you die again. Tomorrow or the day after. And then when I would stop those, they started going into your past. Time was correcting itself. But I can't let that happen. And Ted is confused because he is thinking of this. He's like, well, but if there are infinite possibilities, infinite timelines, then how could my death be a fixed one? And Booster points out because there are infinite timelines where Ted lives and survives and dies of old age. But in those timelines, they're not his Ted. They're not his best friend. They're another Booster's best friend. They're not his Ted. He can't let his best friend, his future brother-in-law, the uncle to his children, the father of his niece, he can't let this happen. And so Ted does the only thing he thinks he can do in this situation, seeing Booster completely broken. Ted gives him a hug and tells him that everything is going to be okay. It will all be okay. And he starts recounting all of the stuff he's seen, just the fragments that he's gotten to see over this time. And he knows that what little time he may have left in the future, it looks like it's going to be the best time of his life. And Booster points out how unfair this whole thing is. He is a time-traveling superhero, traveling the infinite timelines, and he can't save his best friend from dying. And then a booming voice comes from behind the duo, and we are introduced to Booster's boss, Jonathan Kent, Hyperman, the son of Superman and Wonder Woman, from a different timeline, not from their timeline. He is the founder of the Hypertime Masters. They are essentially time police. Their job is to make sure that alternate timelines don't have wars with each other. Think of it this way. Hypertime, their domain, is one half of the multiverse. The multiverse is, in part, alternate realities where physics work completely different. And then within those different physics realities, alternate timelines, infinite timelines. Every decision that can be ever made, every outcome that could ever happen, all happening, branching into infinity. And their job is simply just to make sure that, more advanced timelines don't go and take advantage of less advanced timelines and stopping inter-timeline war. That is their only job. But Booster has taken on a little bit of a side project. Booster is just broken at this point, and he just throws himself before Hyperman and turns himself in. And Hyperman chastises him a bit, but points out that, hey, you did stop all of the time crises that you went and basically caused. And yeah, sure, you've created a couple alternate timelines from this, like now a 5-year-old Ted having seen a future him and a future Booster, and the wedding timeline, and the Scarab timeline. But in the scheme of infinity, accidentally creating a couple new timelines, not really anything to worry about. Rip Hunter is also there, and he and Hyperman and Ted all console Booster about the tragedy of the situation. And then Booster and Ted have a little heartfelt moment where Ted tells Booster, like, hey, if you ever miss me after this so much that you can't stand it, just come back to some point when I'm still alive. You don't have to say anything. We can just hang out and just have a beer together, man. We can just talk. It doesn't have to be a time travel adventure. And Booster cries and nods. And then Rip pats his dad on the back, and they turn to face the door. Meanwhile, Hyperman takes Ted. He is traveling back in time to return Ted to his timeline. And Hyperman says that normally, in circumstances like this, with someone from the past being ripped into the future and getting to see this much of their own personal time stream, he would erase it from that person's mind. But he's gonna leave that choice up to Ted here. Ted asks why, and Hyperman says, because today is the day I hire you. He points out that he has been working with Ted for decades of Hypertime, and says Ted's always had a very serious nature about time travel, and he's guessing this is why. And Ted decides to look at Hyperman and says that he is going to keep his memories. By the sound of it, he doesn't have much time left, so he'd like to remember as much as he can until that happens. And Hyperman nods and tells him, welcome to the Hypertime Masters, Ted. You will do great things. And Ted is returned to his own time, and we get a quiet moment with him. He hyperventilates, he panics, he cries, he is coming to grips, really owning the fact that he is going to die, and it is going to be soon. But then he thinks about all of the adventures he and Booster had, and thinks about all the adventures he and Booster will have. And we see he's pretty excited by it. He's a little optimistic towards this future, however short it may be. And then there's a golden flash behind him, and coming out of a time portal is Booster Gold. But not just any Booster Gold. The young Booster from the museum, the one that just built his first suit, the one who said, "Fuck you, Dad," and vanished. This is where he came to. He's looking around a little disoriented, and Ted turns to him and says, "Hey, this may sound hard to believe, but my name is Ted Kord. You are a time traveler from the future, and I am your best friend." Credits, baby!